And now I would like to call in Maria Andreoli. She's a psychologist, and she's been leading us on a series of presentations about neurodivergence, what they are. And today she's going to be talking to us about a very interesting topic. How can neurodivergent people, what are some of the challenges that they can face when they go to church? Maria, good morning to you. It's great to have you with us on board.
Morning, Scotty. Great to be on here.
That's fantastic. So, Maria, you covered topics of dyslexia. We spoke about ADHD and many other neurodivergent conditions. But one of the things that happen is, neurodivergent people are people, and just like everyone, and they have faith and they want to go to church. But is the church setting ready to receive them? Should they make any amendments? Are there challenges that they face when they come to church? What's your take on that?
Yeah, so I guess because I work, with people with, all types of different neurodivergence, I notice them, I notice them a lot in the churches, in the community. And unfortunately, I have seen, I suppose, something quite sad, and that is that at times I feel that they may have struggled to find a place, well, in many places, but unfortunately even in the church. And, for various different reasons. And I think it's so sad because church is a place of belonging, and joy and growth in Christ. But for these neurodivergent kids and adults, it can also be a place that becomes overwhelming, confusing, even isolating.
Can you give me some examples of things that are typically done in churches, but to a person that has a neurodivergent condition, it can be quite overwhelming?
Yeah, absolutely, for sure. Because, I've already talked about autism, dyslexia, ADHD, for this topic, I'm just going to speak about them, all of neurodivergence quite generally. But in general, take Sabbath school, for example, right?
Yeah,
lot of these
Sabbath school being the time on the Saturday where the Seventh-day Adventist churches study the Bible. So I think it's the equivalent of a Sunday schools in some of the other some Christian groups call it. Mm-hmm.
Exactly. Thanks for that. Yeah. So that kind of take Sunday school or Sabbath school. Take these kids, a kid who's maybe on the spectrum or who has ADHD. These kids struggle in school, being able to kind of keep up with the content. And so teachers have, for the most part, have had to receive extra training to be able to cater the classroom, to be able to suit kids of all different needs. Whereas our Sabbath school, we don't really have that same expectation of training. I'm not necessarily saying we need the same type of training, but at the same time, there's not really an understanding of what is needed for a lot of those kids, who join those classes.
So in a normal classroom, what are some of the provisions that teachers would typically do to accommodate or to facilitate the learning by children with these different neurodivergent conditions?
Yeah, so one of the big ones that teachers are trained to do to support these kids is to provide a lot of clarity surrounding the expectations. As an example, kids on the spectrum really struggle with the unknown and may completely disengage or even really just act out when things do not go according to a specific plan. And it can look a lot like misbehavior. It can look a lot like a kid at Sabbath school or Sunday school just not behaving, just not doing what they're asked to do, but really they're just really struggling. So teachers are asked to provide visual schedules, of what's going to be expected for that day. Just some kind of visual outline of first we're doing this, then we're doing that, then we're doing that. And even just that on its own can work wonders for these kids. Another thing that teachers are taught to be aware of is recognizing some kids, they just take in the world differently. Some, things can be really overwhelming for them, whether it comes to the noise or, crowded environments. So they're trained to just kind of be aware of these things and just try to cater the environment in a way, just being mindful as to not overwhelm anyone specifically.
So is music part of that? Can music, because I've, with some of my experience with people, particularly with children, with different kinds of neurodivergency, they can be quite auditorily sensitive. So sometimes they can feel overwhelmed by, particularly if it's like really loud music or really upbeat. And I noticed that it's not as much if the music on the background is calm and soft and slow, but sometimes when the music is a little bit more high energy, a lot of people struggle with that. Is that only my observation, or is there is that something that you observe too? Is that something that has been scientifically established? What do we do about music, and how can we relate music to people with neurodivergence disorders?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Like your observations are spot on. A lot of these, specifically with autism and ADHD, we know that there is a difference in the way, like, they are perceiving their senses. And part of that is they might be underreactive or overreactive. So they might take in so much more of those senses in at once or not as much. And sound, hearing is a big part of that too. And for these kids, like, loud noises or even just specific noises can be very overwhelming. So part of what teachers are trained to do, and perhaps someone could integrate this into the church environment as well, is creating sensory friendly environments. And by sensory friendly, it's just about being aware, of how people perceive their senses differently, being mindful not to have too much music, not to have too much like loud music, chaotic music, within especially like a Sabbath or a Sunday school where the expectation is for that kid to be calm. And I guess it's just, you would do that for any child, but it's just, I suppose you're just being extra mindful of it. But, sometimes these kids can also, if they do it at school, they might take little earplugs in or headphones, and that can help. And I suppose it's about being open to kids using these types of things in the church as well.
Yeah, I have seen that as well. I once visited a church where they have quite a contemporary worship service with with very loud music, and it was quite upbeat. And I saw that there were some families where the kids were using an earplug, and on top of the earplug, a headphone, just to, I think, to block 95% of the sound there. And so that's a bit of a creative solution that some parents found. So Maria, so we spoke a bit about some of the provisions that teachers make, and clarifying expectations and creating an environment that is sensory friendly. I'm wondering, do you have any patients or clients or personal experience with neurodivergent people attending church services, and how that was something practical that you got lessons from that you would like to share with us today?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have a personal one, actually. Like I said, because I work so much for this, I'm always noticing it. I'm always observing it. I went to a church where, this is a little while back when I was a youth leader at another church, and we had someone join our church, a young man who, he was neurodivergent. He was new to the faith. He was so kind-hearted and passionate about his faith. And he really wanted to be part of the youth ministry team. He really wanted to help out in a very big way. Part of, the way his brain worked, he kind of struggled with communication. It was difficult to understand what he was saying. And because of that, a lot of people kind of advised me to not make him part of that team. You know, they didn't feel that he was going to be able to handle that kind of role. But he was so eager, so I just thought I'll give it a go. So he joined the team, he joined the leadership team, and he actually became such a valuable part of that team, even though he couldn't communicate very well, didn't always, you know, sometimes said things that were a little bit socially perhaps considered odd. He was always, whenever we were setting up, packing up, doing anything, he was always the first to arrive to help out and the last to leave. He worked so hard. And because he didn't really have much of that kind of thing in you that, you know, that kind of social embarrassment that stops you from saying or doing certain things, he was so bold in inviting everyone to our events. And because of that, like, we actually had so many people arrive, you know, and show up that would have never otherwise come. So he just became such an amazing part of the team in his own unique way. And even though he couldn't do the things that everyone else could do, he could also do things that no one else could do. And I think that's something when we're talking about neurodivergent people in the church, it's being able to see them in all their uniqueness and recognize, like, yeah, this person, you know, might be different to the majority of people, but they are part of the body of Christ and they can bring in an element that other people can't bring in. And just being able to notice that for the beauty that it is so important.
That is such a great story of how the church was able to integrate that young man and what a difference that he made. And I think that this is the purpose of the church, isn't it? Like that we can function as a body, which with each person belonging to a ministry. I actually have had I received here a few messages, Maria. I think this is a topic that is really resonating with people. Chris wrote and said this year, one of my granddaughters was diagnosed with developmental language disorder, DLD. I believe this to be a generational and know how hard it can be at school and even now as an adult.
Yeah.
So developmental language disorder. So so that's one question here. The other message that we got is from David, and this is what he said. He said, "This is why I've stopped going to Sabbath school, and I just do the daily Sabbath school lessons at home, because the interaction never follows the lesson in class. And so having Asperger's myself, I don't know where they're going through with the lesson."
Yeah.
Why do you think is that? So that is, I think it's what you mentioned about having a direction, a structure to follow, that sometimes neurodivergent people struggle with a bit of if we have like a chaotic session. Is that what you would, is that what it appears to be?
Absolutely. With autism, used to be called Asperger's. So we're talking about the same thing here. There's a really strong need for routine and predictability. And when something does not follow what we kind of expected to, the routine that we expected, it can actually be really distressing, you know. And so I think that's exactly that text message just shows like the impact it can have on someone, like where they will actually not even feel comfortable attending, you know, when something like that happens.
That's right. And look,
I think it's not about, and I don't think we can always, you know, make something follow the exact routine, but it's just about having a lot of clear communication, setting the expectations, and just being able to notice people, notice when they're struggling, and just being able to ask questions and understand why. Yes,
absolutely. Well, Maria, thank you so much. I think that brings a lot of mindfulness to particularly church leaders that are ministering in that space with neurodivergent people. And there's definitely some very, very powerful and important points and tips there for us to follow. Thank you so much for today's chapter of your series of neurodivergence.
Thanks for being a part of the Faith FM family. Join our community on Facebook or get in touch at 1-800-FAITH-FM.